So really looking forward to hearing what God has given for us to hear today, Max. And as we begin, I will read our passage. It's John 4, and I will read from New King James Version. So John chapter 4, verses 3 to 18. He left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of the ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." But his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. When then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water, springing up into everlasting life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have well said, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly." So, Max, over to you. God bless you as you speak to us.
Oh, thank you so much, Adelina. Thank you. Well, it's a real joy to be back here at Hillview, albeit virtually, and to be part of this series that you're doing on encountering Jesus through the Gospel of John. And you know, in John 1:4, John tells us there about Jesus that in him was life. And this theme of life pulses its way through the Gospel of John, and it's here again this morning in John 4, where Jesus is drawing a desperately thirsty woman to know him and to trust him as the living water that can satisfy the thirsts of her life, her thirst for life. And so our title this morning is Jesus, our Thirst Quencher. And you know, this is the longest private conversation that we have recorded in the Gospels. And so it's so rich in theological truth that we could spend hours just unpacking it and exploring it, but we don't have hours. We just have a few minutes. And so I'm going to focus very narrowly on just 2 things. One is our thirsts, the nature of our thirsts, and secondly, the character of Jesus as our thirst quencher. So, thirsts. In the dictionary and in our Bibles, thirst is defined as a strong desire for something, as a longing, as a need that aches to be satisfied. Hudson Taylor was a pioneer missionary in China in the 19th century, and he wrote this about thirsts. Who does not thirst? Who has not mind thirsts or heart thirsts, soul thirsts or body thirsts? Well, no matter which, or whether I have them all, come unto me and remain thirsty. Ah, no, come unto me and drink. It's beautiful, isn't it? You know, we are thirst-prone people. It seems that we get thirsty when our needs are not being satisfied or fulfilled. Our bodies get thirsty because God has designed and created our bodies that we need water in order to live and to thrive. Water sustains our lives. I read that we can live for 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water before our cells begin to break down and before we begin to die. And you know, just as we need water physically, God has designed our innermost beings, our souls and our spirits, that we need the living water of the life of Jesus in order for our souls and our spirits to be fully alive. You know, when we talked about John, I mentioned John 1:4 earlier, that in him was life. Jesus was bursting with the life that God intended each one of us to live. He is our model for life, but he is life himself, and we need infusions of the living water of Jesus in order for us to fully live. But you know, we can believe up here that Jesus is our thirst quencher, but unless we acknowledge and recognize the thirsts in our lives, we probably won't come to him as our thirst quencher. You know, we recognize when our bodies are thirsty, don't we? Because we begin to get a dry mouth, or we may get a headache, or we may begin to feel dizzy. And it's like our bodies are saying, hey, I need some water right now, or I'm not going to survive very much longer. But how do we recognize when our souls are thirsty? How do we do that? And I think it's often by recognizing our fears and our anxieties, our restlessness, our grouchiness, our irritations, or our discontent or our disappointment with ourselves, with people, with things around us, that these are often signals that our souls are saying, hey, I need an infusion of the life of Jesus. I need the life of Jesus now. I need his peace. I need his joy. I need his rest. I need his strength, and I need his comfort. I need Jesus. And these are our soul's ways of signaling what we need here. But you know, like in any relationship, in order to entrust our deepest selves to somebody, we need actually to trust them. I love that song, Jesus, Jesus, How I Trust Thee. That was beautiful. And it really leads into this, that in order for us to really give our deepest needs and our thirst to somebody, we have to trust them. And in this chapter this morning, what Jesus is doing is he's showing us that we can trust him with our thirsts, that he is a safe person to come to with what is deepest in us. And what we're going to do is, because it's such a long chapter, we're going to plunge into this chapter in verse 16, where Jesus says to this woman, go and get your husband. Now, this verse marks a key turning point in this very unlikely conversation. And it's an unlikely conversation because, in contrast with Nicodemus in chapter 3, which everything was right about that conversation, he was the right gender, the right religion, the right ethnicity. everything about this conversation is wrong. She's the wrong gender, she's a woman, and a respectable Jewish man did not speak to a woman in public. She's the wrong religion. Jews regarded Samaritans as religious heretics because they worshipped God on Mount Gerizim instead of in Jerusalem where the temple was. And she was the wrong ethnicity. Jews despised Samaritans as being of mixed race. They considered them to be half-breeds. And then on top of all this wrongness, Jesus asks this woman for a drink. And it would be a bit like asking somebody with COVID if you could share their coffee cup. The moment Jesus accepted a drink from her hand or anything from her hand, he would be immediately ritually defiled. So much wrong, isn't there, in this conversation? But you know, Jesus just bursts his way through all this wrongness to reach this woman. You know, in John 10:10, it tells us that Jesus says, "Let me tell you why I've come. I have come that you might have life and have it in all its rich fullness." Jesus has come to bring us life. And he came to bring this woman life. And so he's pursuing her. You know, it says in verse 2, Jesus had to go through Samaria. He was compelled to go because this woman was there. And what Jesus is doing here actually reminds me of the chorus of one of my favorite songs, which says, "Ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough to keep me from getting to you." And it's like Jesus is crossing every mountain, valley, and river in order to reach this woman with the life that he wants to give her. Now, up until this point where he says, "Go and get your husband," the conversation has been about water. It's all been about water. First of all, physical water, because Jesus asks her for a drink. And then Jesus turns the conversation to be about living water. And he implied that she was the thirsty one who needed the living water that he could give her. Now, she doesn't get it immediately, a bit like Nicodemus didn't get about being born again immediately. But Jesus tracks with her until she gets to the point where she says to him, "Please, sir, give me this water so that I will never thirst again and I won't need to keep coming back to this well." And that's the point at which Jesus says, "Go and get your husband." And it seems like he's making a complete change of subject here, doesn't it? But he's not. Because he had said to her, "If only you knew who it was that's speaking to you." She didn't yet know him. What she wanted was a change in her circumstances. She wanted her life to be easier. She wanted never to thirst again and never to come back to the well. And Jesus knew that it wasn't enough that her needs were being satisfied on the surface, that her circumstances could be changed. She needed to know him because he was the source of the life that she really, really longed for. So when he said to her, "Go and get your husband," he's beginning to move her into knowing him. And he's doing it through the door of her brokenness and of her need. While she answers Jesus, she says to him, "I have no husband." Now, John's audience would immediately know what she's implying here, because in this culture, not to have a husband would mean that this woman had no status, no voice, no respect, no dignity, no place in this society. She had no protector and no provider. And what she's basically saying to Jesus is, "I am nobody. I have nothing. I am nothing." She's being so vulnerable here. And I wonder what she expected Jesus to respond how she expected him to respond. Because what Jesus actually says to her is, well said. You've said that so well. You've spoken well and truly. And you know, a lot of our translations here, they just say, that's right, oh, that's correct. And they miss the affirmation and the encouragement that Jesus actually uses here, and the warmth of his words. You know, these in the Greek, these two words that Jesus uses to say, well said, you have said truly, are the same words that I used of him in Mark 12, where he answers the scribes' questions about which is the greatest commandment. And they said to him, well said, you've said so truly, that's bang on. And Jesus is saying that to this woman here. They're words of grace, which shouldn't really surprise us, because she is face to face with the one who is full of grace. Do you remember in John's prologue, he described Jesus being full of grace, and she is face to face with grace incarnate. You know, one of my very favorite definitions of grace says this, that grace is the face that love wears when it meets imperfection, weakness, failure, and sin. She opened her life to Jesus and she discovered grace. And it's a bit like what Anne was speaking about earlier, isn't it? She discovers the grace of Jesus meeting her. And you know, it's the same for us. Whenever we turn to Jesus, and we are always in our imperfection and weakness and failure and sin, there's never a time when we turn to Jesus that we are anything more or less than that. And what we encounter is the face of grace. Every time we do that, he is grace to us and for us. And it's this grace of Jesus that cradles the truth of what he's now going to say to her. And he goes on to say, for you've had 5 husbands, and the one you're living with now is not your husband. You know, excuse me, there are different perspectives on what Jesus is saying here. One perspective is that he's revealing to this woman that these words are words of judgment and condemnation, excuse me. And that he's actually revealing to her her sin and her need for forgiveness from him as she repents. That's one perspective. Another perspective is that Jesus is actually revealing himself to her, that he's revealing to her that he knows her, he sees her, he knows everything there is to know about her life, and he understands, like John's audience would, how hard her life has been. You see, in this culture, in this context, a woman's life was never her own. At about the age of 14 or 15, her father would have given her in marriage to some man who he could get a really good deal with, to some family. And from that point on, this woman belonged to this man until death or divorce separated them. Now, in this culture, only men could divorce women. A woman had no right to divorce. So if this woman's been divorced 5 times, it means that some men, 5 men, have married her, have rejected her, cast her aside. If she's been widowed 5 times, it's improbable, but not impossible if the family are following the Levirate law, which meant that the widow of a deceased man would be passed on to his brother, and then to his brother, or to another family relative in order to keep his name alive. Now, most commentators think that it's probably a mixture of both. She's been both widowed and divorced. This woman has known loss and suffering and hardship on a level that most of us will never experience, thankfully. And then, when Jesus says, and the man you're living with now is not your husband, Jesus makes no comment about this. And John doesn't explain it. Very often John puts a little bracket around something and gives us an explanation, but here he doesn't. So we don't know who this man is that this lady is living with. And it could be an uncle, it could be a brother, it could be a man who has brought her into his family as a second wife, but has not given her the title of wife. And whatever this means, that she's living with a man who is not a husband, what we do know is that it's not an adulterous relationship, because the penalty for adultery was death by stoning. And this woman is very much alive. So we know it's not an adulterous relationship. But whatever it is, Jesus knows that in the wake of each death or each divorce, there would be deep hurt, unbearable pain, hopelessness, fear, dread, disappointment about what the future holds. And whether we believe that he is seeing her sin, or whether we believe that he is seeing her deep need and her hurt, the truth is that he sees her and that he knows her. He knows everything there is to know about her. And this is what she believes as well, because at the end of this conversation, where Jesus actually reveals to her that he is the Messiah, and she believes him because she runs into town and she tells the whole village, "Come see a man who knows me inside and out," as the Message translation says it. He knows me inside and out. Could this be the Messiah? Oh, surely this is the Messiah. Do you know, we may be sitting here today and we could think, I have nothing in common with this woman. I've never been married 5 times, divorced or widowed 5 times. We have nothing in common. And yet, I doubt that there's any one of us here this morning who doesn't, as Anne mentioned, who doesn't live with regret about something that we've done or that we've said, who doesn't live with some shame, who doesn't live with the memory of some sin that sticks like Velcro to our souls, even though we've confessed it and it's been forgiven. My guess is that there's not one of us here today who doesn't know what it is to have had significant loss in our lives, or deep disappointment, who doesn't know what it is to have relationships that have failed or have broken our hearts, and who may still be breaking our hearts today. My guess is that there's not one of us who doesn't live with fears of the future or anxieties in the present. And these circumstances that we live in, they create needs and thirsts, but long to be satisfied. My guess is, if we ask this woman, what are your thirsts? She would probably say that she thirsts for belonging, that she thirsts for acceptance and for love, that she thirsts for security, stability. She thirsts to be known and seen and understood and recognized. And, I think that if we were to make a list of the thirsts of our lives this morning, some of those same words would be on our lists as well. I know they're on my list. And, if we can be, if we can be as courageously honest as this woman was when she said, "I have no husband," I think what we will discover is that Jesus comes to us at that place of need and in that thirst, and draws us to himself to drink of him. And you know, one of the questions is, how do we drink from Jesus? Well, I think we drink from Jesus the same way as we drink from a cup or a glass. We open our mouths and we swallow. And when we come to Jesus to drink from his life, what we need to be doing is opening up to him our needs and our thirsts, of opening them up and saying, here I am. This is me, without pretense, without hiding anything. These are my thirsts, dear Jesus. I open up to you. I open my heart to you. And then Jesus, to trust Jesus to flood us with what is needed to satisfy those thirsts, which is his life, all that he is. You know, one of the things we need to do is to recognize our thirsts, but another is to recognize the wells that we go to satisfy those thirsts. In Jeremiah 2:13, Jeremiah says this, God says this, my people have committed two sins. They've abandoned me, the source of living water, and they have dug wells for themselves that cannot hold water. And we do that, you know, we build do-it-yourself wells. And we need to recognize what our wells are, because if we stay with our wells, we don't turn to Jesus. And sometimes our wells are not wrong. There was nothing wrong with the water in Jacob's well that this woman was drinking from, but they cannot satisfy us in the long term. We'll get thirsty again. And you know, your wells may be something as innocuous as a bar of chocolate or a glass of wine that comforts us. But you know, our needs for belonging, for respect, for honour and dignity, those needs, we may build wells of, we may pour ourselves into our roles or into our relationships in order that our needs for belonging and respect and honour get met. Our need to have purpose, or thirst for purpose, we may pour ourselves into church activities or into our jobs or into do-it-yourself hobbies that satisfy that need for purpose. We need to know what it is that we turn to before we turn to Jesus, because these are our wells and we may go to them, but they won't satisfy in the long term. And then finally, I think one of the ways that we drink from Jesus is to come to his word looking for him. There's a lovely line in a hymn that says, beyond the sacred page, I seek thee, Lord. And in John 5:19, Jesus spoke to the Pharisees. These were men who loved the word of God, who loved the law of God. And in the Message translation, this is what Jesus says to them. You have your heads in your Bibles constantly because you think that in them you will have eternal life. But here I am standing in front of you, and you won't take from me the life you say you want. God has given us his word in order to reveal the wonder of who he is and the wonder of Jesus and the life that he has for us. And I remember when I was a new believer, somebody told me that Jesus is on every page of the Bible. You just need to find him. I was reading in Leviticus at the time, and it was a real challenge to find Jesus there, but I found him in the pleasing aroma that the sacrifice made to God. And so now when I come to the scriptures day by day, my question is, Jesus, show me yourself. Show me yourself in this word. Show me yourself so that you can satisfy my desire for you, my desire for life. You know, as we open up our lives and our thirsts and our needs to Jesus, and as his life floods into us, as we trust him to flood our lives and our souls with the living water of his own life, as our souls are saturated with him, what will happen is what Jesus said to this woman, that his life in us will bubble up, will just spring up in us, and it will splash over onto the lives of others. We won't have to worry about how do I become like Jesus? How do I act like Jesus? Because the life of Jesus living within us will overflow us. So it won't be overwork to be like Jesus. It will be this releasing of the life of Jesus in us, that it overflows us and splashes onto everybody else with his love and his joy and his peace and his courage and his restfulness. The wonder of Jesus will overflow out of our lives and into and onto the lives of others. That's the prayer of my own life, that day by day, as I bring my thirsty soul to Jesus, and I trust him to pour his life into my soul, that I would overflow with his life and his beauty and his wonder to a world that desperately, desperately thirsts for the life which only he can give. And I pray that that will be so for all of us. May it be so. May it be so. Amen. Thank you.